Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats are disputing the Republicans' account of Kavanaugh's prior background probes on Twitter. A pair of tweets from the committee account controlled by the Republican majority referenced Kavanaugh's prior FBI background checks, noting nowhere in any of these 6 FBI reports was there ever a whiff of any issue at all related in any way to inappropriate sexual behavior or alcohol abuse. Committee Democrats responded with a letter to the chairman, writing, "While we are limited in what we can say about this background investigation, there is information in the second post that is not accurate." Your thoughts about it? What are we finding out in the 6 previous FBI background checks of Judge Kavanaugh?
What's most important, Chris, is what those 6 prior reports lack. And I am constrained by what I can say.
Did they go into his high school and college record in drinking?
As a general matter, FBI background checks do not go back prior to 18 years old. They focus only on coworkers, professional colleagues.
Well, why not the freshman class at Yale? These people are all over the place tonight, coming in with hitting the tip box with all kinds of stuff now.
Because generally, the FBI clearances focus only on the references submitted by the nominee himself.
I see.
And here's the important point. The FBI still has probably about 40 witnesses, as MSNBC has reported, that they still have failed to interview, not probably as a result of self-imposed constraints, but rather straitjacketing from the White House. And they need to talk to, for example, one of the witnesses that I put in touch with them, who can tell them about possibly improper outreaches to key witnesses in the Ramirez incident who were known to Judge Kavanaugh, and potentially indicate that he knew about that New Yorker story before it came out.
Is that illegal to go around and call on people you know who are about to talk about what your misbehavior, your misconduct?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.